Ever feel like your to-do list is a mile long and you're drowning in emails?
Yeah, I think we've all been there.
It's like the Sunday scaries, but every day of the week.
Totally.
And that's what we're tackling in this deep dive. Workplace stress and burnout. We've got a really interesting article that goes way beyond those typical self-care tips.
It really does. And, it's something people are talking about a lot more these days, mental health at work.
Right. It's not taboo anymore to say, hey, work is stressing me out.
It's about time. And this article digs into how counseling can be a game changer, both for employees and the companies they work for.
Because, let's be real, a burned-out team isn't exactly a recipe for success.
Not at all. In fact, the article really drives home the point that ignoring workplace stress and burnout can have some pretty serious consequences. We're talking about the health of the company as a whole, not just individual employees.
It's like that saying, you can't pour from an empty cup.
Exactly. And if your employees are running on empty, well, that's going to show up in their work, their engagement, and ultimately the company's bottom line.
It's like that statistic I heard a while back, and it's probably even worse now, that employee burnout costs the U.S. economy something like hundreds of billions of dollars a year.
It's wild, and it's not just about the financial cost either. The human cost is huge, too.
Absolutely. When people are stressed and burnt out, it impacts every area of their lives. Their health, their relationships, their overall well-being. It's just not sustainable.
And that's why this article is so important. It doesn't just throw out a bunch of generic advice. It really digs into the nitty-gritty of what causes burnout and what we can do about it.
And it makes a really clear distinction between stress and burnout, which I think is important.
Definitely. One is like that short-term burst of energy, to meet a deadline or something.
Right, like that coffee-fueled sprint to the finish line.
Exactly. But burnout is a whole different beast. It's like running that marathon without any training, without any fuel, and frankly, without even signing up for the race in the first place.
It's like your soul is slowly being drained.
And the thing is, those little things that stress you out, those daily hassles, they can turn into some pretty serious health issues if you're not careful.
Like what? Give me an example.
Well, for starters, chronic stress can weaken your immune system, making you more susceptible to colds, flus, you name it. It can mess with your sleep, leaving you feeling constantly drained, and it can even increase your risk of heart disease and other serious conditions.
It's like your body is in a constant state of fight or flight mode.
Exactly. And that's no way to live.
It's not sustainable, and it's definitely not healthy.
Yeah.
So what's the solution?
Well, the article makes a pretty compelling case for counseling as an incredibly effective way to combat workplace stress and burnout.
I'll be honest, when I hear counseling, I immediately think therapy couch, and it can feel a little intimidating.
I get it. But the way this article frames it is really refreshing. It's not about fixing anyone. It's about giving people the tools and strategies they need to navigate the ups and downs of work and life in general in a healthier way.
It's like giving someone a toolkit to handle whatever life throws at them.
Exactly. And everyone loves a good toolkit, right?
For sure. And speaking of tools, I noticed the article mentioned CBT specifically.
Cognitive behavioral therapy. Yeah, it's a really interesting approach to managing stress. Basically, it's about identifying the negative thought patterns that contribute to stress and learning how to reframe them.
So instead of thinking, I'm going to mess this up, you learn to challenge that thought and replace it with something more positive and realistic.
It's not quite as simple as just changing your thoughts, but you're on the right track. It takes practice. But with CBT, you can actually change the way you react to stressful situations.
That sounds incredibly empowering.
It really is. Imagine feeling more in control of your reactions to those everyday stressors at work. That's the power of CBT.
It's like you're retraining your brain to respond differently to stress. Instead of just feeling better, it's more like you're changing how you think in the first place.
Exactly. And, the article makes a good point that CBT isn't the only approach. There are tons of other ways to deal with this stuff, which is great.
Like different tools in the toolkit, right?
Exactly. It's not a one-size-fits-all kind of thing.
So let's say you're listening to this and you're thinking, okay, this is all great, but what can I actually do about it? As an employer, how do you create a workplace where your team feels supported?
Well, this is where the article gets really interesting. It doesn't just say, hey, mental health is important. It actually gives companies a roadmap to build a culture where well-being is a priority.
So it's more than just having one of those stress management webinars once a year and calling it good.
Yeah, way more. It's about weaving it into everything you do. Imagine having training programs for everyone, from the CEO to the interns, so everyone understands mental health and how to support each other.
That makes so much sense. Like, imagine if knowing how to support someone's mental health was as common as knowing what to do if someone gets hurt at the office.
Right. And it's not just about training either. It's also about creating a space where people feel comfortable talking about this stuff.
So, like, having open communication channels and maybe even peer support groups.
Exactly. Because sometimes it's easier to talk to someone who gets it, someone who's been there.
There's a quote in here that I absolutely love. It says, investing in employee mental health isn't just the right thing to do, it's the smart thing to do.
So true. It's a win-win for everyone. And you know what? Even if your company isn't doing all these things, there are still steps you can take yourself.
You're totally reading my mind. The article had a whole section on self-care, and some of it was surprisingly practical.
Oh, for sure. One of the biggest ones is time management. And trust me, I can't stress this enough.
It's like that whole thing about taking control of your time and setting boundaries, right? Which, I'll be honest, is something I struggle with myself sometimes.
It's a journey, right? But it's so important. And honestly, even just taking 5 minutes for yourself can make a world of difference.
Like hitting the reset button. And speaking of taking control, it seems like catching those stress signals early before they turn into full-blown burnout is key.
It really is, and it's not always obvious.
So what should we be looking out for?
Well, it can be subtle things like feeling tired all the time, having trouble sleeping, or just being more irritable than usual.
You know, those days when you snap at the barista for getting your order wrong.
Exactly. Or maybe you're not eating like you normally do, or you just feel off. It's really about noticing any big changes in your mood, your energy levels, how you're acting.
So basically, don't just brush it off as part of the job and keep pushing through, right?
Right. Because the longer you wait, the harder it can be to deal with. The article really stresses reaching out for help, and the sooner the better.
Which can feel kind of scary, but they did have a bunch of resources listed.
Yeah, they had some great ones. Like, a lot of companies these days have those employee assistance programs, and those are usually free for employees.
Oh yeah, I forgot about those. We have one about my work, but I haven't used it.
Yeah, a lot of people don't even know they exist. But you can also talk to a therapist on your own. The important thing is to find what works for you.
Because there's no shame in asking for help.
Right. None at all. In fact, it takes a lot of strength to admit that you need some support.
Totally. And, the more we talk about this stuff openly, the less scary it becomes.
Exactly. It shouldn't be a taboo topic.
I think that's the biggest takeaway for me from this whole article, that you're not alone in this. Everyone feels stressed sometimes, especially with how demanding work can be these days.
It's true. It's practically an epidemic.
Right. And the more we normalize talking about mental health, the better off we'll all be.
Absolutely. And it's not just about surviving the workday. It's about actually thriving both at work and in your personal life.
So well said. And if companies are seeing amazing results, like happier employees, higher productivity, by taking care of their team's mental health, what's stopping your workplace from jumping on board? That's something to think about. Thanks for diving deep with us today.